Sempre.
I'll do that. You don't have to run around. I'll just ask everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to start the next panel session. If you wouldn't mind taking your seats, please. You can tell that the last panel session was very exciting because everybody is still discussing over on the left-hand side. I hope this next panel session will be as equally exciting. Gentlemen, thank you. Okay, we will now start. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, honoured guests and delegates here at COP27. I have the wonderful privilege as the Chief Executive of the Association for Renewable Energy and Clean Technology, the REA, to introduce this next session. And you can see that this session is due to run from 15 minutes after 1 until 2:45. It will be made up of a keynote speaker who I will introduce in a moment, and two fantastic panel sessions chaired by some really key expert people. The theme of today's session is renewable energy in Commonwealth countries and beyond, and a glimpse of the global low-carbon transition. Now, I know you will have been to many, many talks already and understand that we need to bring together coalitions of effort across the different nations where the common theme is to see the whole transition around energy. And I'm pleased to say that in the conversations we're going to be having this afternoon, we're talking more than renewable power. We're talking about decarbonising power, heat, transport, using local, national capabilities at their best ability to deliver a sustainable net zero future. I'm honoured that we will have as our first expert speaker, our keynote, is Mr. Amadua. Could I have the next slide, please? Next slide. Oh, okay. Next slide, please. Yeah. That's the wrong one. Maybe not as exciting as the last panel session, but maybe a little bit more funny. I think I've explained what's in this particular slide, which is around all the different types of renewable energy forms, around power, heat and transport, and around the forms of generation and the challenges of the systems and technologies and industries that we need to really address. This one summarizes it pretty well, and it's a view for 2030, and I'm sure you've been to many areas where we talked a lot about offshore wind and a lot about solar, of which the REA represents. But here we can see where the demands and the challenges of how we have to decarbonize globally could be broken down across all the different forms of renewable energy. And no surprisingly, there is a big indication of a reliance on bioenergy as well. But solar and wind and the development of hydrogen as a vector for all our different types of energy uses is very much on the cards, but by 2030 is not really a major player at this time. Anyway, that was my introduction, and now we'll move on to the next slide, please. Oh. Yes, here we go. So, I've got the privilege to introduce the Principal Secretary for Energy and Climate Change of the Seychelles. It is Mr. Tony Imadua, and he's been working in the experience of public service for over 19 years. And this appointment now as the Chief Executive of the Seychelles Energy Commission was the job that he was doing before, so we can definitely see that we have an expert leader in this role to look at what the challenges and the opportunities are for the Seychelles. I'll hand over now to you, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nina. Fellow leaders, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a great honor to be here today to play a part in this side event. And I will first of all like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share with you the experience of Seychelles when it comes to transition to a low carbon and zero emission. Seychelles is a young nation, a very small island in the Indian Ocean. We are proud of what we have achieved, but like many small island developing states, we experience a series of unique and social and economic challenges, mostly due to our small size. With over 344 kilometers square of land distributed around 115 islands and spread across 1.3 million square kilometers of water, Seychelles sometimes is referred to as a large oceanic state. However, our existence is being threatened. A threat we are facing, and it is for this reason we are here today at the COP27. Like many small island developing states, we are experiencing its impact from frequent severe storm hitting our outer island to coastal erosion and degradation. 95% of Seychelles' critical infrastructures is located on the coast and is exposed to and already being impacted by sea level rise, coastal erosion, and saltwater intrusion. These effects of climate change will also affect over 40% of Seychellois who live along the low-lying areas. Although the situation is perilous, we are not sitting back, but rather we are taking action and showing the world we are resilient and capable islanders. And I'm proud to say that. We, countries of the world, one world, need to act now. For Seychelles, transitioning away from fossil fuel through decarbonization of existing industries and generating new green ones based on renewable energy and cleaner sources of energy is a high priority. 98% of our primary energy consumption comes from fossil fuel, which has an impact on our financial account, which accounts to almost 10% of our GDP. Transitioning might seem like a straightforward proposition, but for us is anything but straightforward. Genuine transition for seeds like Seychelles will need to be socially, environmentally, and economically viable and should be sustained and enduring over time. Ladies and gentlemen, renewable energy for us plays a crucial role in this transformation, and it presents an excellent opportunity for Seychelles to strengthen its energy security and reduce our dependence on imported fossil fuel. In the last decade, Seychelles has installed 21 megawatts of a mix of solar PV and wind plants. We started with a 6 megawatt wind farm back in 2012. That was following the development of the energy policy and the Energy Act. Since then, we have installed a 5+1 megawatt utility scale PV plant and more than 6.5 megawatt distributed PV generation on both residential and commercial sectors spread across the main island of Seychelles. We are all fully aware that despite having technologies, the integration of renewable energy to the grid is, in particular, variable sources is very challenging. Even more so for isolated systems like Seychelles. Introduction of variable renewable energy sources present new dynamics to the electric sectors. As such, the country utility company recently installed a centralized storage system to support the grid, the integration of increasing share of variable renewable energy system onto the grid. This will not only support the operation of the grid, but also strengthen it and allow for higher penetration of renewable energy. The country is also focusing on its outer island, and this is part of a government strategy to make this island green. Currently, we have more than 3 megawatt solar battery hybrid system installed, which are contributing to between 80% to 98% of electricity generation on this outlying island. Seychelles has set a target of 15% in the electricity generation sector, and as signatories of the Paris Agreement, Seychelles has agreed to strive to a net zero by 2050. Unfortunately, the task is daunting, especially given the island has limited resources such as land. Therefore, the country is turning to its vast marine environment for solutions, which we have started to explore. We are currently developing a 5 megawatt PV project on marine environment. This will be the first IPP project for Seychelles, and it's still on track to be the first floating PV project on marine environment in Africa. In addition, we are currently exploring the potential of bioenergy such as biomass and waste to energy. To conclude, I would like to say that the challenges to complete transformation of one economy to mitigate climate change, adapt to its adverse effect, and increase climate resilience are immense. but so are the opportunities, and we must grasp them now before it's too late. I hope all of you have a good event. We have so much to gain by sharing the experiences and ideas with one another, and I believe a collective effort is needed, and we need all hands on deck. Thank you for your attention.
Next slide, please. Thank you. So I was remiss in wanting for all our slides to be shown in the right order to introduce our co-organisers of this event, which is essentially the key people from Fiji and the International Hydropower Association as well. The colleagues from these two organisations will be chairing the subsequent panels. But before I do that, I thought I would explain a little bit about the REA and why we are stood here. We are a UK trade association of 21 years of age, so we're only a young trade association, created really way back when to make the case for renewable energy and clean technology in the UK. So the logo that you see there, our hive, really does describe the emphasis and the work when we say we want to see a future built on renewable energy and clean technology. So in that slide, whilst we represent 14 different renewable and clean technologies, we actually work very hard to discuss matters in the terms of net zero and aims for decarbonisation. One of our early roles as the REA was to report when the UK was a member of the European Union every single year, were the UK keeping their promises by the end of 2020 for the Renewable Energy Directive? And whilst you have probably heard many of our leaders in the UK saying that we are leaders in renewable energy and clean technology, I'd like you to see this slide, which may prove a case in point. So on renewable power, which is the blue bars, as we've reported in our report, Review 2022, you can see that we have done very well with decarbonising our power systems. In fact, our members, when we wrote our strategy as an industry sector to deliver net zero by 2050, we believe we can surpass the 50% point by the end of 2022. But it can't be done alone. It's done with supportive policy, regulatory regimes, a government that's focused on this area, not changing prime ministers every 3 months. Sorry, a little joke on the behalf of the UK. But the real journey is there in the red and the greeny blue areas. Because if you think we're leading on heat and cooling and on transport, then there's another thing coming. So that is why we work very hard with colleagues to learn around the world, particularly with our Commonwealth colleagues, that we want to be able to accelerate this. Otherwise, net zero and achieving 1.5 degrees and the role the UK will play along with all the other nations just will not happen. Anyway, that's just a little bit about the REA, and you can read more about our specific work that we do on behalf of our members in Review 2022. If I can have the next slide, please. So, this brings me now to the interesting part, the technology panel discussion. I'm going to hand over chairing now to one of our co-organisers, and that is to Alex Campbell, the Head of Research and Policy at the International Hydropower Association. Can I have the next slide, please? So as you can see here, Alex will be joined by the following panelist very soon, and also that he will be able to bring to bear all of his vast experience in working with them. You know, he directs IHA's research and policy work, and it covers everything, include greenhouse gas emissions, energy storage, integration with other energy technologies, such as floating solar, PV, hydrogen and hydro battery hybrids. And he joined in 2020, and previously he was head of the very important UK market model known as Contracts for Difference policy, of which many of our members have benefited from in terms of getting secure investment away. But he's worked right across on an international platform. So I'll hand over now to Alex to chair this session.
Thank you so much, Nina, and thank you everybody for coming here today. And we have just-in-time delivery for our panel, which is excellent timing on Pranav's part. So I'll briefly introduce the panel, then I want to show you one quick slide, and then we'll go to a discussion, if that's okay. So I need to check my notes just to make sure I say everything correctly. So we've got Dr. Ram Babu Paravustu, there we go, is Chief Sustainability Officer for Greenco Group. Greenco Group is a major Indian renewable generator, indeed the first dispatchable renewable company in India with 7.5 gigawatts of capacity covering solar, wind and hydro, so extremely fitting for the discussion today. Then we've got Stephen Wheeler, the Managing Director of SSE Renewables, and you might recall from Nina's slide how well the UK is doing in power generation decarbonisation, and in large part that's down to SSE, who are really delivering, for example, the world's largest offshore wind farm, as well as a long-standing history with hydropower, and indeed in the wider SSE group, looking after some of the grid in Scotland in particular. And then last but by no means least, Mr. Pranav Mehta, hope I pronounced that correctly, Pranav, the chairman of the National Solar Energy Federation of India. The National Solar Energy Federation is an umbrella organisation representing the full solar value chain in India, and you work closely with the national and state governments to help ensure India's targets, which include 450 gigawatts of renewables by 2030, are actually achieved, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about that in a moment. So I'll come to the panel for questions in a moment, but if we could just go to the next slide, please, just to help set the context some more. So hopefully, if for those of you who are aware of the International Energy Agency, or indeed IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, or others, you'll know this general picture. And what we're seeing here is the change between the non-decarbonised electricity grids of today and how that needs to shift to a net zero grid in 2050. As I say, this is from the IEA, the World Energy Outlook, published just last week, I believe it was just launched. Others come to similar conclusions, but I've chosen the IEA because that's the most recent. The really important points to note here are huge increase in the amount of electricity that we need to generate by around a factor of 3, just to give you a sense of the scale. So around 3 times as much electricity will be generated in 2050. And that's driven by factors such as an increased population, a growing economy, richer people tend to consume more electricity, and last but by no means least, decarbonisation, not just of the power sector, but the wider sectors that we heard about. Things like heat and transport will require large amounts of electricity, decarbonised electricity, to ensure that they're decarbonised. Another important point to note, at the moment we've had a huge amount of fossil fuel generation on electricity grids. That will need to drop. According to the IEA, we will go from around 14,000 terawatt hours today to at around a tenth of that by 2050, and most of that will be with carbon capture. So a huge change in the amount of those flexible sources of electricity generation, gas in particular, and to a lesser extent coal, and that needs to be picked up somewhere else. You can see hopefully from the chart behind me, that wind and solar are going to do most of that. Huge increase in those technologies, but we need to double hydropower, we need to double biofuel. It's a really, really big push for the planet to get to this, to achieve net zero. So what we're hopefully going to talk about today is some of the integrated, sensible possibilities that we can do, and some of the challenges as well. So if we could move to the next slide, please. Hopefully back to our panelists' mugshots. Yeah, so perhaps we'll start with a question on, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. We'll start with you, Ram. As I just hinted at there, and as I'm sure your company is demonstrating, no single renewable source of energy will deliver the energy transition on its own. What do you see as being the best mixture of technologies in your particular context to help ensure cheap and reliable electricity, low carbon electricity generation at scale?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. In the Indian context, if I really see that we have already about 400 gigawatt of generation capacity installed in India to meet approximately 200 gigawatt of peak electricity demand. We already have double the capacity to meet around 200 gigawatt of peak demand, and we have around 160, 170 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity, including hydro, large hydro also. So that's our configuration. So in India, if you really see, our grid is extremely inflexible grid because we are either coal or renewable. The flexibility to some extent can be added possibly by hydro, but that's also very limited. And the wind regime and solar regime can give us some amount of handle to be able to provide reliable power and affordable power. But it's absolutely important, and more important than in Europe and some other geographies, that we need to have a grid scale storage in India. That is what will offer, okay, a solution to be able to provide 24/7 renewable electricity, a reliable renewable electricity, affordable renewable electricity in India. So there is a significant focus today in India to build grid scale energy storage, and especially we are relying on, we explored number of alternate technologies like batteries and long duration and multiple long duration energy storage technologies. It appears to us that the pumped hydro provides us the best solution as of today, at least for a significant part of our storage requirements. So Greenco as a company, we are delivering by 2024 50 gigawatt hour per day energy storage capacity. And going forward, we will increase. And it's not just the Greenco. We have a number of other companies significantly entering into this. Basically because, as you correctly said, for the net zero, we have to increase electrification. Hence, electricity demand will increase. We have to get into mobility, which is again to be run on RE. Hence, the electricity demand will increase. So the electricity demand, which is around 200 gigawatt peak demand, may even become by 2030 up to something like 350 to 400 gigawatt. And to be able to accommodate 400 gigawatt of electricity, even if I want to do 50% by renewables, we expect to do it more than 50% by renewables. But even if I want to do 50% by renewables, I require significant amount of storage. Another sweet spot that the India is getting into is that because we are building this pumped storage, and it's one of the most cost-effective storage alternatives, we have a dispatchable or demand-following renewable electricity, and demand-following dispatchable 24/7 renewable electricity is very well suited for alkaline electrolyzers, not PEM electrolyzers. Alkaline electrolyzers, we seem to be there at a green hydrogen architecture at the border of something like 3 to 3.5 USD per kg. So it's an excellent thing that is happening for India, so that we can get into the green hydrogen. If the green hydrogen immediately is not taken up, at least we can get into green chemicals like green ammonia and methanols and sustainable aviation fuels, etc., etc. So India seems to be in a great sweet spot, and our Prime Minister declared that India wants to become energy independent by 2047. And this energy independence by 2047 would mean it is not just the electricity, It is a complete component of the energy that is very, very huge because we have a huge import bill. We depend on importing the gas, etc., etc. So to be able to do that, I think the storage capacity has to be built up, and the electrolyzer manufacturing is being built up in India. Greenco is putting up, next year we will have a 2 gigawatt alkaline electrolyzers manufacturing in India. So I think with all these things, the net zero equation seems to be okay, and the theme seems to be accelerate implementation of known and well-proven technology without waiting for something to come. Whenever it comes, we will take that up also, but nothing to postpone. Because after all, the 1.5 degrees is not only a flow problem, it's also a stock problem. If you postpone, you will build up stock. So I think India is doing well on that particular.
Great, thanks a lot, Ram. And I think that sense of urgency. Let's not hang around for tomorrow's technologies. We know what we need to do today. And you mentioned pumped storage. Just for those who might not be aware what pumped storage is, it's a form of hydropower. You have 2 reservoirs. You pump water up a hill when electricity is cheap and demand is low, and then you release it later on when demand is high. It's basically the world's water battery at the moment. And I know SSE in particular has an interest in pumped storage. And if I could turn to Stephen, that kind of mix, obviously the British context is different from India, all sorts of differences there. What's your approach to getting that kind of optimum mix of technologies to deliver the low carbon transition?
I'm on now. Alex, if I may, just for 1 second, just before I jump into that, I really just wanted to touch on our keynote speech in terms of the Seychelles and in terms of Paraguay's situation, because I actually think, I know Tony has just left, he's obviously had other engagements, but it's truly inspiring to see a story like the Seychelles in terms of actually the challenges that lie ahead, but most importantly, actually the need for action now. And I know we talk about COP27 as the implementation COP, but it was really truly inspiring to hear that story, and I think it's a real lesson to us all. We're going to talk about technology. The wonderful news about technology is the technology is there. We have an abundance of technology. What we need now is action, and we should all take a lesson, as we've heard the story of the Seychelles. From a UK perspective, very different than India, but actually quite similar in the same sense. The similarities come down to the resource. Huge resource in the UK. We are blessed with some of the best offshore wind opportunities in the entire world. And there is no doubt that the UK is really taking action and really progressing that. Set on ambitious, bold targets for 2030, 50 gigawatts. And that's a huge opportunity both to create jobs, to invest inwardly into the UK, but a real opportunity for us to really tackle the big challenge that is climate change. And as we've heard from the keynote speak, there is no bigger challenge of this generation than climate change. And what we've learned over the last 12 months is very much, it's not just about climate change. Security, supply and affordability are also critical to that. And the really interesting piece, and I think this is what's really changed in the last number of years, is the cost of technology has now landed at a place that it is the least cost. For example, offshore wind is now the least cost use of energy, not just across renewables, across all sources of energy. So then when you think about, the technological mixes, I'll start obviously with offshore wind. I've had the privilege of being in this industry for over 20 years now. 20 years ago, offshore wind was nothing. It was possibly 2 to 3 megawatt machines. Dogger Bank, the world's largest offshore wind farm we're currently building, that will be 13, 14 megawatt machines. But already, since the time of that deal being signed and that construction progressing, we're now in a world where offshore technology is going to get over 20 megawatts in the next number of years. So this decade, we will see 20 megawatts. So the power horse of renewable energy from a European point of view in particular has to be, within my mind, without doubt, wind and offshore wind in particular. And then you start to think about the complementary technologies that are required to reach a 100% renewable system. And my esteemed colleague talked about hydro and conventional hydro. And at SSE, we've been in hydro for over 80 years. We've nearly 1.5 gigawatts of conventional hydro, but also pumped storage. And within the market within the UK, we're already seeing the importance of this Hydro now operates in a totally different way than it operated 10, 15 years ago. It is now absolutely the balancing criteria or balancing system within the UK system, and we're progressing further developments in the UK in Coire Gas, which over when it's built will actually double the storage capacity in Ireland. So again, hydro and pump storage will have a big impact. The other big opportunity in terms of big offshore wind is how do you connect big offshore wind? That is one of the big challenges of our generation. How do you connect big offshore wind? So you need to think about different ways to connect it. Yes, your traditional way, straight to the grid, producing electrons, supplying electrons to the national grid. The alternative is hydrogen. You're seeing huge excitement around hydrogen. Hydrogen is now going to be a big part of our energy mix going forward. Yes, it's at a nascent stage, but so was offshore wind only 10 years ago. So the speed, the pace of change of the technology is happening so quickly. So hydrogen is going to be a massive impact both in Europe, but also right across the world. And the last piece I would say is, you only have to turn up in Sharm el-Sheikh today to realize just the incredible resource we have in the sun. And solar has to be, it may not be the prominent or predominant energy source in the UK, for example, but in India and other developing countries, there is a massive opportunity. Barriers to entry are little, if not. Costs have come down so much in the last number of years. So when you tie it all together, we've got an incredibly positive position in terms of climate change, in terms of security of supply, in terms of affordability. This is not about one technology. This is about all technologies. And the challenge is and will continue to be how we can integrate those technologies. And that's where we're also seeing huge progress.
Fantastic. I think that really segues nicely into Pranav. Pranav, we just heard about the offshore wind potential in the UK and how that's really driving decarbonisation there, backed up with some storage. Obviously really important in Europe. And we just heard about I think we're feeling, those of us from northern climes are feeling the effect of the sun when we go outside. Obviously you represent the Indian solar sector, which is one technology. How do you see solar in India complementing other technologies on the grid in India? What are the key asks that you would have to help deliver?
At the outset, I wish to thank the organizers, that is REA, FICCI, IHA, and SSE. I was going through the SSE website, very impressive. So really good work is going on. At the same time, I would be speaking from my national experience in India. And India is a very wide country. So kindly remember that. And also internationally, because I was the chairman, I continue to be director of the Global Solar Council. And I was also in the powerful steering committee of IRENA, where we have been discussing various technologies. And presently, I am also chairman of the International Solar Alliance Corporate Advisory Group, what private sector and government together can do. So with this background, I will always start with that anything that we do, has to be seen through the lens of UN Sustainable Development Goals. We should not lose sight of that. In that, electricity is number 7. It is a great enabler. It can, that poverty alleviation, water, agriculture, everything, it can help everywhere. The energy can play a big role. At the same time, from the question that is there, interconnectivity between renewable energy is not difficult to answer the question. But ideal is something that you have to ponder over. And there can be no one solution for even a country. For instance, in India, some places where hydro is available, we can go for hydro. But there is abundant solar. So we cannot neglect that. We were trying to address Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and there, despite plenty of sunshine, they are planning hydro, because maybe their original planning was like that, but my question is that how long will that hydro last? And the flip side of hydro also we have to look at. I am not against hydro. Pumped hydro in Gujarat, Greenco is bidding, and I wish them success. And if they want any help, I will help them. But I am not against hydro, but I am certainly against large plants. Large plants are inefficient. You know this electricity that comes out starting from coal mining to when you fetch it using diesel and electric to the boiler efficiency, then you convert into steam, steam drives the turbine drives the rotor, rotor to bus bar, and then through various transformers to here. Only 5 to 10% comes out. 90% is a colossal loss in conventional energy. So we have to think of unconventional energy. There is absolutely no doubt on that. Now, in that, what has nature given to us overall? So, in IRENA, we have been debating this, that how do we achieve 100% RE by 2050? Because we have to, you see, all these coal plants and all people have taken time to penetrate. So, this renewable energy penetration, though it is moving very fast, we have moved from gigawatt to terawatt as far as solar is concerned. So, that disruption is taking place whether we like it or not. And we are the people who are pushing this agenda. So, I am glad to be doing that. But at the same time, the overall picture that emerges for 2050 is that about 69% will be solar, 15% will be wind, the rest 15% will be biomass, waste to energy, etc. And recently that hydrogen we have been talking about in the last 3 years or so, and it is a great potential if the cost comes out. And we have to work on it. USA is working. We are also working on it. It is a big challenge. And until we do that, it is a big hype, hydrogen. So I say that please deliver. Whatever research, I am proposing international research center where we all will under ISA, where we get together near ammonia, fertilizer plant, refinery, etc., and steel plants, etc. That is hard to abate, including cement plants. So with all this, there can be no single answer to a country. There has to be region specific. Yes. I am almost over, don't worry. Because I can, you cannot stop me. I mean, if I really go on. But main thing, and it all comes from experience. And in India, we have very clear mind that 500 gigawatts is the target by 2030, and we will have large part of it as solar, as 350 gigawatts, and balance will be the other energy sources. So likewise, for instance, this morning we are talking of Commonwealth countries. All of them will have specific solution for a given country, given region.
Thank you so much, Pranav. So I think the key message that's coming in there, and in fact coming from everybody, is it's not the same fix in every country. Every country has, every region has a different mix, but the technology is there, and we can have a discussion about the role of large hydropower. We would say that's very efficient in some places when it's done sustainably, but we can have that conversation later. I see George is telling me we've got a couple more minutes, so I will see if anyone in the audience would like to ask our panelists a question. Don't be shy. Any thoughts? I see a possible one there. Oh, got to go and get the microphone. Poor George is having to run around. He's having an athletic day. Thank you. Yes. I'm just sorting out the technology. There we go. Eddie, do you can come up here and ask.
It's a lot scarier to ask from here than it is from down there. Hi, I'm Eddie Rich. I'm the CEO of the International Hydropower Association. Now, I think those main messages come out very strongly about we have the technology, let's just take action. I do want to come back a little bit, of course, on the point made by the last speaker about large hydro and efficiency. I mean, as far as we are concerned, it's not about large or small. It's not about on river or off river. It's not about new or old. It is about sustainability and efficiency. And that's absolutely what needs to be tested. And it's because it is a very nuanced picture in different regions that we need an assessment. And we have worked very hard with NGOs and governments and banks to do assessments of sustainability. So I really hope that as renewables, we can always speak in favour of us, because God knows the world needs all the answers it can get. So we should all be supporting each other, ensuring that whatever comes forward is efficient and sustainable. It was really a comment more than a question.
Thanks, Eddie. And just as we wrap up, perhaps I can ask our panelists, if you just had one quick policy recommendation to policymakers, whether in your own country or globally, what's the one thing you'd really like to see them do to deliver the energy transition? Ram, perhaps I could turn to you first.
Yeah, India has already sort of started looking at storage as a service, and it already is talking about storage obligations, just like they have a renewable purchase obligations, hydro purchase obligations, and storage purchase obligations. But to us, what really important is that when we deliver with all that we can do 24/7 CFE, carbon-free energy, this carbon-free energy and its definition has to be much more clearer. That means what goes into the grid, 15 minutes later is drawn from the grid, not 1 year accounting, not 24-hour accounting, etc., etc. I think that challenge still remains.
So really clear definitions on 100% low carbon electricity. Thank you. Stephen.
Alex, I think we've achieved a huge amount. There's no doubt about that. There's obviously a lot more to be done. But actually, if you look at, the last 10, 15 years, the biggest sticking point to implementation is really our planning system. And I think everyone is now talking about it. My example earlier of Dogger Bank took 10 years to newly consent. I think I saw a recent study, on average is around 10 years to consent a offshore wind farm. The bottom line is that's just too long. And that is something, it's really encouraging to hear leaders around the world talk about the need to change that. That has to be changed. And the other thing I would just point out, if I may, Alex, is I know you've only asked for one, but just the second one is actually, we're living in unprecedented times right now. Inflationary pressures and costs have skyrocketed. We've seen huge. We have to be very careful that in terms of actually a cost of capital, any policy that are brought in, whether it's improved planning, whether it's improved grid connection, whether it's a clearer route to market, we need to ensure that they are not adding to the cost of capital, that they are maintaining our cost of capital as low as possible for renewable energy sources. And just a quick stat out there, we've recently done an independent study in the UK where we looked at the cost of the energy transition for the UK, and 1 percentage point increase in cost of capital will cost UK society £45 billion between now. That's £45 billion between now and 2050 to hit net zero. So again, policy needs to be very much focused on how we ensure the cost of capital for renewables is the lowest cost of capital when we're looking at competing generation sources.
So get consenting and planning sorted, get it proportionate but quicker, and then be extremely careful with your policy framework that you don't increase the cost of capital.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Then Pranav, if I could finish with you. If you're sat in front of the world's policymakers, one policy change that they need to make to help accelerate the electricity or the energy transition.
Yes. Small is beautiful. Energy must be generated where consumed. Matter over.
Thank you very much. So small is beautiful. Brilliant. Oh, we do have a question. So have we still got time for a question, George? Thank you. Yeah, please. If you could introduce yourself.
Sorry. My name is Javon Sands. I'm a student researcher. I'm from the Bahamas, but I study in Minnesota, and I'm actually here on behalf of a friend because her topic is renewable energy. I'm focused on climate adaptations, but I did have a question about green skills because I feel that in making these solutions, we often only look at one side of it. So we're having a technology Q&A, but we can't have technology if we don't have people who know how to operate, manage, and maintain the technology. And so I feel like a discussion about green skills and something that's really prevalent and should be on the agenda for this COP and any of them moving forward is getting into the local communities and training individuals to be able to use this technology and be able to keep that going for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an excellent question, and I'm delighted to say the next panel will be, in part, addressing that. So we'll pick up on skills then, but thank you for raising it. And thank you once again to the panelists. Thank you for your input today. Thank you in the audience for listening. And we're going to turn over to the next panel now. Thank you.
Nice to get in touch again.
So this concludes the first part of this session, which was focusing on technology. I'm now pleased to invite the second panel, which will be chaired by Mr. Krishnan, Mr. Kollaru Krishnan, from the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, FICCI. He is the chairman of the Climate Change Committee, and he will take you through who the other panelists are. And whilst they're coming to the stage, I want to express my thanks to Alex Campbell for chairing that session really well and keeping to time too. So this session will be focusing on how can the development of renewables address small, medium enterprises, communities, and address inequality across our Commonwealth nations. What are the supports and the opportunities that are available to help the nations that need to go through this transition? So it's not about a choice, it's about this commitment now for net zero, that all nations need to go through this. And I know that there will be some touching on the fact that we need green skills and jobs in order to deliver all of this. I'll hand over now to the chair, Mr. Krishnan. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. And, in my introductory remarks, let me mention that it was a pleasure for me to meet you and your team. And I was impressed to see about your strategic program, the Net Zero Pathways. And why I'm commenting on that is I think it is a little contextual to this session. For me, it was refreshing that it avoided hype and hyperbole, which unfortunately is the norm in today's digital era. Another thing is that it didn't have very complex forecasting based on modeling which this big data analytics imposes on us. They were time-bound, cogent, tangible, actionable goals with decarbonization on short to medium term. And I think that is really what is required when we're going to be talking of how we bring about this change with the community angle at its base. The topic, of course, low carbon energy transition for Commonwealth countries has immense significance. One is, of course, from the Commonwealth nation's share of global population and economy, and the immense potential from shared history and people-to-people level relationships that you have within these nations. Renewable energy will, of course, be a main driver. However, for net zero perspective and for efficacy in implementation and for meeting the needs of the community at large, it will have to be integrated into a green economy framework. capacity building has been mentioned. And we also need to make sure that it is not a top-down approach saying, you need this clean energy. No, I need energy. I will give you clean energy on demand at an affordable price. So it's very necessary to integrate into a green economy. So this will bring into the spectrum resource efficiency and circular economy, sustainable mobility, sustainable habitats, and the clarion call which our Indian Prime Minister gave at Glasgow, which is for adoption of lifestyles for environment. Another important thing is the Commonwealth nations. I mean, if I leave, Great Britain away, it comprises LDCs developing to emerging economies. And most of the energy and infrastructure has still to be built. Hence, it's a great opportunity to combine mitigation and adaptation. So it must have a very nuanced approach where we are addressing both mitigation and adaptation. 2022 has been very severe, but the last 3 years have been, equally bad. So we need to make sure we get these aspects in. And I'm going just to flag some areas, and we'll be hearing from our panelists. The first, obviously, is distributed renewable energy, which takes care of electricity, heating and cooling, and mobility. Because when we do this, we're really addressing both mitigation and adaptation. Smart and sustainable farming, along with low-carbon distributed food processing and cold chain infrastructure, which is very important in the Commonwealth countries where agrarian communities still represent a very large percentage of the population. Agroforestry and other nature-based solutions for carbon capture offer a huge potential. We have done a lot of work in India on agroforestry, and of course we'll have technological solutions for carbon capture. Between you and me, I'm not so thrilled about solar geoengineering, but I think agroforestry and other nature-based solutions would be great job creators as well as help in progress toward net zero. Humongous amount of biowaste is generated, so they're processing into biomethane and other advanced biofuels offers another great opportunity. And then climate resilient and low carbon buildings and urban infrastructure. So I just thought I'll put a little bit of a contextual thing for the very eminent panel that we've got. And Alachi, maybe if I can start with you. Now, Commonwealth Sustainable Energy Agenda has made phenomenal contributions to creating an enabling ecosystem and frameworks for sustainable energy. But you brought an emphasis on strategic partnerships. So let me give you an anecdotal incident. This goes back to 2018 Nairobi. It was a roundtable on India-Africa Partnership for Sustainable Development. An erudite and articulate woman from Kenya said partnerships like gender equality is oft-spoken, less frequently practiced. She flagged that partnerships should not have the old-fashioned donor approach. The donors don't have all the wisdom, what technology is required or what funds are required. She says it has to be a shared experience. And as such, she's an erudite young woman. So in shared experiences, she said, as India, you have done a lot of good work for distributed renewable energy. You can come, work with our people. We can bring solutions out here. And she quoted statistics on India's yields and consumption of water and chemical fertilizers for some crops. And she says, India can learn from Africa on sustainable farming. You come, we share, you learn. So with this contextual thing, could you please explain how you go about it?
Thank you so much, Kalori. And I just got to say thank you as well to our organizers for the opportunity to speak about the work that we're doing in the Commonwealth Secretariat to support the energy transition across our member countries. So a bit of information about myself first. My name is Alache. You can all see that. And I work as a legal advisor and the lead for the Commonwealth Sustainable Energy Transitions Agenda. I work with a broader team that is the Directorate of Trade, Oceans, and Natural Resources. And the work that we're doing builds on almost 60 plus years, I think, of supporting our member government in sustainable governance around their natural resource, so traditional extractive sector, and now more broadly looking at reforms around the energy sector. So the Commonwealth, we're talking about the Commonwealth. I just realized across the panel, apart from you, Kalora, no one's really spoken about what the Commonwealth is. So for those of you who may not know, the Commonwealth is a voluntary association of 56 independent and equal countries. Our last two members, Togo and Benin, joined this year during our heads of government meeting in June in Kigali. It's home to 2.5 billion people, of which 60% are under the age of 29. So we're also a young Commonwealth, young people. So intergenerational issues are critical for us in the Commonwealth. Out of our countries, 32 are small states, and 25 of them are classified as small island states. And Tony Madua, who spoke this morning, is from one of the Commonwealth SIDS, and we have peculiar challenges faced by small nations in the Commonwealth, and this is an area of focus for us. So along with our youth work, our small states is a key area of advocacy and technical support in the Commonwealth. So, out of global development, I've got this nice slide that I like to show that has, the circle of all of the SDGs, and slap there in the middle is energy. You definitely need energy to power any of the goals that we've set before us as a global community. So whether that's ending hunger and poverty, whether that's health or education, clean water, decent jobs, even life expectancy is linked to access to energy. Many developing countries have an energy access gap. So I think it's 759 million, the last figures of people without access to energy, of which 50% live in the Commonwealth. And I think of the 2.2 billion people who don't have access to clean cooking technologies, more than 10% of the top, more than half of the top 80% are also in Commonwealth countries. They are really critical issues at the community level, at the individual level, at the country levels around access to energy. And so despite contributing less than 7% of total greenhouse gas emissions, developing countries and SIDS are at the forefront. I find it really poignant if you walk past the Pakistan pavilion and there's that sign that says what happens in Pakistan doesn't remain in Pakistan. This is a global challenge. You can't resolve the energy transition for some countries and not for others. Decarbonization has to happen across the globe, otherwise we don't have a workable solution. So countries have to work together. We have to find out what we can do together to actually resolve the issues. That's what we're going to do. So partnership is going to be core, it's going to be critical to ensure that we have an answer that is global and that really responds to the challenges that we have. Now, what we're doing in the Commonwealth, we've set up what's called the Sustainable Energy Transition Agenda. And essentially, that's a platform for Commonwealth member countries to collaborate in accelerating the energy transition and also closing the energy access group, so the goals of SDG 7. The modalities for action are through what we call a country-led action groups, where you have member countries cluster around issues that are critical and core to them. And we've launched 3 so far. One is around energy literacy. And this is something that's not very much spoken about, but to the average citizen on the streets in many developing countries, the issues that we're talking about, those are not the things that are important to them. I was at the Sustainable Energy for All conference in Kigali earlier this year, and a really powerful statement someone made, one of the delegates made, was this. He says, you're talking about a transition to clean energy, whether that's power, whether that's transport, whether that is for building. He says, in my country, we're talking about transiting to energy. We do not have energy. So the question really is, on the platform of the Commonwealth Sustainable Energy Transition, it's built around 3 key pillars, looking at issues of what an inclusive and an equitable transition will look like for countries with differing circumstances. I have to say, quite a few of our member countries, I think 23 in total, are resource-rich countries. How do you ensure that the transition will happen for those countries in a way that will be economically and socially sound for them, as well as environmentally sustainable? So you're also looking at what are the technologies and how do you then accelerate or scale up those technologies in Commonwealth countries? Again, it's not an easy question to answer, but I always say technology is going to become the next oil. If you have that technology resident in other countries, it needs to be imported into less developed countries. That will now become the new choke point. So we're talking about locally developed technologies and low-tech solutions that can be scaled up in developing countries. So we're sharing knowledge on the platform around this as well. And lastly, we're also looking at it around the enabling frameworks, and this is the work for the government to do. How do you create the frameworks in the countries, the market conditions, the policies, the laws, the regulations that can attract the finance and attract the investment that's required, and also retain it and have it deployed in a way that is actually impacting the people who are on the ground. So we have this platform for collaboration, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't do it alone. We work in partnership with other organizations who are working in the space. So we have quite a strong partnership with Sustainable Energy for All, where we have developed a toolkit to help small island developing states put together a business case for their clean energy sector. We also have an MOU and a partnership with IHA, which we are hoping to scale activities under that partnership. We also work quite closely with Bloomberg New Energy Finance. So there's the intergovernmental aspect, and then there's the organizational aspects. But I just want to end by saying that, the energy transition, really, it's going to be about people. You asked a really excellent question about capacity building, and that's something that we're trying to do with our energy literacy initiative. Raise awareness, build the capacity, ensure that this is embedded for people, for individuals, for communities, for cities, for countries. It's absolutely important. And I'm just going to quickly plug this. We've got these children's books which we've put together. There's a series of 3 of them. I had some on the table. I see that they're all gone, but catch me afterwards if you want to talk about these books and other initiatives that we have around capacity building for the energy transition. So I'll just stop there now.
Thank you, Alachi. And love to see that. And maybe I'd just add to that, what we have done in India is we've also created, we have in India an entity called Skills Counter Green Jobs, created by Government of India Industry. And we've been doing a lot of such initiatives. And recently, the World Bank has asked us to create a curriculum for high school students to see whether we can put an add-on course of vocational training in a normal high school student's curriculum. Kate, SSC has done great successes in mainstream renewable energy, electricity, and thermal, and upgrading transmission distribution system for high volume renewable energy in UK. Now, replication in developing economies will face challenges. Lack of physical infrastructure, availability of engineering consultants, vendors, subcontractors locally, because they have to create jobs and they have to achieve cost structures which enable the community to afford the energy products or services given. So what are your thoughts on how you would like to take this in the same spirit of partnership, but it might involve a tripartite, quadripartite thing, joining up a few Commonwealth countries and trying to find solutions in a customized fashion for each country?
Brilliant, thanks very much, and thank you for the invitation to speak here today as well. So I think when it comes to the energy transition, right, it's all about justice. That's the kind of buzzword at COP this year, right? You'll hear loads about the just transition. And what does that actually mean, right? So if we think about where we need to get to in terms of the actual transition to net zero, then we need to think about how are people impacted, whether that's good, bad impacts across communities, workers, consumers, all sorts of different people are going to be impacted in different ways. And we know that actually when it comes to implementation that, vulnerable people are often the ones that bear the burden and the unfair burden of the costs more so than others as well. But if we think about climate change itself, then that's a justice issue too. And of course, today is Gender Day at COP27, so it would be remiss to not mention the unfair impacts on women in the transition as well. When we think about the really kind of core challenges, what we have, then we have the idea of skills and how we actually make sure that there are the skills behind the huge transformation, really, that's going to be required here as we go forward. So the next decade is really the most important decade of history. And a company like SC Renewables, in the last 2 years, our workforce has gone from 900 to about 1,500 people, just showing the scale of the upskilling that's required. But actually, we need to think about where those jobs are as well. So up in the north of Scotland, for instance, we've got our biggest currently operational offshore wind farm, Beatrice. 2/3 of those workers come from high carbon jobs, and those jobs are being created in some of the most rural places around Scotland as well, which is amazing. And you're offering new high skilled, high quality jobs in these places. But actually it's all about, how do we make sure that what we create now as we go forward to net zero is different from what's happened before. I think that's where the UK can really share some important learnings. We've been through a transition. SSE itself used to be a company that about a third of our generation was coal, and now we don't have any coal. We closed that in 2020. But we need to think about actually, as we go forward, how do we kind of adopt a systems level thinking and rethinking of what needs to come next. It's not about just, building on the past. It's a complete change of what we've done, and the level of activity is just going to be incredible. I think when we move to thinking about actually communities and their importance as well, then it's all about developers like SSE moving to think about how do we start to co-create with communities. It's not about us doing one thing to communities, but actually how do we create and share that value together? And that can be done in lots of different ways, because really, who are our communities? Yes, it's the people, the workers that live close to our projects, but for a company like SSE, we've got a massive supply chain. It's about how the people that work close to our supplier sites as well, their jobs rely on SSE too. And if we think about, I heard an amazing statistic the other day that was, I think 70% of the minerals and resources that are required for the net zero transition sit on indigenous land, right? So indigenous communities, they're our communities as well. So we really need to think in a much wider sense about how we interact, co-create, and really share that value with communities as we move forward, because there's certainly enough of the pie to go around for everyone.
Thank you. Very enlightening. So just to supplement what you were saying, we have in skilling adopted something like recognition of prior learning. In India, we had a capacity for about 20 gigawatt supercritical coal-fired power plants. That probably would be good for about 50 gigawatt solar or wind. We have 9 million Indian workers in the Gulf countries in the energy sector, and there's a trickle coming back. So we have, in the pandemic period, trained 400,000 people as recognition of prior learning, so they transit from fossil to renewables.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, about a third of our employees have moved from high carbon roles. So there's certainly that idea of transferable skills is happening already, and it's our job to make sure that we smooth that transition and get the most value for working people.
Richard, Carbon Trust is an enviable track record, and I could see many industry segments. Would love to have a chat with you more on that, for progression toward net zero, target setting, identifying pathways, assurance, footprinting, policy advice, strategy setting, program delivery. So I'm sure you have a lot to say, and looking forward here. But may I request you to specifically flag on your experience of Kellogg's supply chain? Why I'm mentioning this is Scope 3 emissions is becoming important. Now, just like ESG, in India we have something called BRSR, Business Responsibility Sustainable Reporting, which is mandated for the top 1,000 listed companies. And the supply chain reporting of Scope 3 has to start from March 2024. So that will encompass probably the bulk of the Indian industry and businesses. And sad to say, I think even the large food majors, they're grappling with this, not out of intent, but they really don't have a clear idea of the supply chain and the emissions linked to supply chain. So if you could take a few seconds to comment on that also.
Of course, thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you, REA, for having me. The Carbon Trust is a global mission-led organization. We're solely focused on accelerating the move to a decarbonised future. And we work very much internationally and very much in collaboration across sectors, which is absolutely key to this session, which is all about communities. How do we get renewables implemented at the speed and the scale that is essential to the scale of the urgency and challenge that we're so aware of. So just a couple of thoughts. I think on Scope 3, so the engagement of suppliers, clearly we're moving from ambition and pledges through to action, implementation. And I think, as we've been hearing over the last days at COP, it now needs to be very much focused on accountability, organizations actually getting on and doing what they're claiming they're going to do, and a focus on transparency. And this is very important, as is the thread of discussion we had in the first panel around data and the accuracy of that data. But just a couple of things I would want to kind of add around this discussion on community. Obviously, communities are all about people, and the urgent drive we all have to net zero is much, much broader than the energy transition. It's about economic transformation. And I think, as my fellow panelists have pointed out, today is Gender Day, and absolutely right. Those being affected, as we know, worst by the impacts of climate change are women and children. And actually, I think the focus on a just, equitable transition, economic transformation as part of net zero is the challenge that I think we need to be tackling at the community level. To the question again that was asked by our friend in the Q&A panel, I think skills are absolutely at the core of how we make this work at the community level. And the UK government is very much associated with a number of programs around energy access. So we still have a fundamental issue with regards to access to clean energy, as has been pointed out, very much within the Commonwealth. 7% of greenhouse gases come from cooling, and as the world heats up, our demand for cooling, as you can hear all around you, is getting more and more scary. We're going to be doubling the scale of clean cooling by 2050, and clean cooking is a staggering challenge. So to make these things work, to tackle these risks, but to deliver the opportunities we need to at the community level, that's about transferring capability, and that's around work placements, secondments, master's training, making sure that communities are getting the renewables opportunities that they can actually own, operate, manage at the local level. And that's incredibly important to tackling this challenge.
Thank you. I'd just like to take a point on this. About a couple of years ago, when we were trying to make a push for rooftops, the World Bank actually gave a big program to Skills Council of Green Jobs. We did capacity building among utility engineers, regulators, entrepreneurs, and this thing. Now, we have started with the Indian Chartered Accountants Institution, which has started certifying CAs for BRSR thing. So if we make progress, which we have a lot of enthusiasm on this table, I think we need to bring in some of these knowledge sharing on how the chartered accountants have to ultimately certify, whether you call it BRSR, another nation have something else. So perhaps, we can think of how we can collaborate for this.
Are there any more questions for the panel, or would you like anybody in the audience like to ask this fantastic panel whilst they're here? This is your opportunity. Whilst you have our great speakers, maybe you have another question. I can tell this young gentleman here is dying to ask another question.
Hello?
Is
it working?
Yes. Hey, technology.
Oh, actually, you mentioned low-tech, upscaling low-tech solutions, and I think that was very important to bring up, because a lot of times when we think of technology, we're thinking on the big scale or like very, very complicated things, when with like locally led community adaptation, for example, low-tech, upscaling those low-tech solutions are really important, and it doesn't require a lot. And so all the talk around how much do we need to put towards, how much effort, how much work needs to go into this, once you get the community started, they're going to run it because this is for them. They're going to do it for themselves. And so just giving them that initial support is really important for those solutions that they're sitting on them right now. And if they're in the room, they let you know, all we need is just a little bit, just a little push in the right direction to get those low-tech solutions to be upscaled. So I was really glad that came up. And I think I had another question. I think we talked over here, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, SSE Renewables? Yes.
Kate.
I think, I don't know, maybe it'll come back to me. But thank you.
Okay. Are there any more questions before we close? Yes, there's a gentleman with his hand in this side here. Thank you, George. Please say your name and where you're from.
Good afternoon, Shimon Francis from a small island developing state of St. Lucia, that's in the Caribbean. Over this COP, we've been hearing a lot about loss and damage. I think part of loss and damage, maybe if not in this COP, maybe the next one, should be for small islands to sort of get some support in terms of the same capacity building. I have received support from India once, where I got some training in renewable energy. So maybe the bigger emitters can do the same, just invest in the seeds to get the capacity developed.
Okay. Any thoughts from the panel on that suggestion? Maybe Elache?
Thank you for the questions. Thanks, Chairman. We do have a unique opportunity which we are promoting in the Commonwealth. There is a UN-India window funding opportunity which essentially does what you've asked for. So that's a fund that's being set aside and being funded by the government of India. And it's accessible to Commonwealth member countries. And maybe we could talk offline about that. And that's to use, it's open for projects around the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have successfully put together a grant proposal for Barbados, which has been successful, and there's been a grant, and that's been used to build local capacity to support the extractive sector and the broader energy sector in Barbados. So there's definitely opportunity to do the type of capacity building, the type of knowledge sharing with support from other Commonwealth member countries. That's definitely available. And yeah, just maybe to speak a bit to what you said about the low scale, I saw this fantastic product that's been put together by a UK company called B-Box, and it's just been scaled and has also been deployed in a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa, which is really small solar units that power, utilities within, it's of course it's decentralized, and power utilities within a home. But I've just got to say something is that one thing that we definitely continue to sound is that when these solutions are deployed, it shouldn't be just about turning on the light bulb in the house. It should be energy for productive uses when you do that. And there's, with the finance, the success in the financial inclusion sector in developing countries, which has shown that when you fund small and medium enterprises, which is typically run by women in communities, whether that's through cooperative groups, whether that's directly funding them, I'm a strong believer in that adage that give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. When you fund those groups, you also empower them, you also achieve those goals of, pushing forward the energy transition, and you're doing that through the local communities, you're strengthening the communities, you're strengthening the homes. So yes, those low tech, but please, for productive uses is what we say. Thanks.
Thank you, that's a really great answer. Is there any more questions from anybody in the audience for our panelists? Oh, yes, there's a hand up over here. Please say your name and where you're from.
Hi, my name is Francesca Butler. I'm from the University of Illinois. I'm a student researcher in the United States. So sorry I came in a little late, but was definitely interested in what everyone was talking about, and especially in relation to a panel I was listening into earlier that was focusing very much so on technology. Personally, I'm investigating carbon capture and sequestration options as a viability for lowering carbon emissions. So specifically, I was wondering if anyone could kind of speak to investments and innovation for already produced and present emissions from previous and current energy structures as we're moving towards that transition. And how possible is that, knowing that, climate change is such, time is of the essence in protecting people, from, our island nations and folks like that in our global community. Is that possible, do you think, within our current capitalist world structures?
Yeah, so which of my panelists would like to give a nice, short, succinct answer to that? Because that could be a whole afternoon's answer.
I can
you realise that. Go ahead, Chair.
India has given a quantitative NDC of 2.5 to 3 billion tons carbon sink by 2030. So in the short to medium term, it'll be more on nature-based solutions. The technological solutions will take time because of the cost structures. And the other thing is, we have to be looking at the nation to nation and geographical spread, because in context of India, you may capture carbon, but what about the utilization of storage?
Okay, anybody else on the panel want to add? I think SSE and Peterhead may have a view.
So I love the question, very interesting question indeed. And I think that your last point around, can our capitalist system deliver the changes that we need, is an important question, but I guess this is the system that we have now, so we need to think about how can we adapt and change the capital system to ensure that we can deliver in the way that really values the environment, social, shared value with communities, with other stakeholders as well. So I think one thing for us is definitely around the need for corporates and countries to make sure they're paying the right amount of tax. So SSE is a company, we've been Fair Tax Mark accredited since 2014. Paying tax matters for a just transition, absolutely at its core. I think the other thing that we need to really make sure we're doing is setting the right social standards in what we're doing and in incentives for moving towards decarbonised energy systems. So if we have a race to the bottom that only focuses on price, that of course has huge social value, right? Low prices is good for energy consumers, but actually if it comes at the cost of human rights, of workers, of good jobs, then that's not good for anyone. So I think maybe we could chat afterwards, but great question, and yeah, I think there's a lot more to do with that because it's transformation, new systems thinking, absolutely. And on the part of carbon capture and storage, and I think there's loads of interesting stuff going on. I don't know if you heard the technology discussion before, but there's the need for all sorts of different technologies, and that point around right now it's a transition, so we need to think about what do we do with the carbon emissions that are, you know, going to come in the next decade and beyond as well. So yeah, we'd love to chat further with you on that point as well. But I think there's also loads of great nature-based solutions that can really help with that as well, which SSE is looking into as well.
If I can add, does anybody else want to add to that? I've got a little point of view I'd share with you. So carbon capture, usage and storage, or CCS as it was known 25 years ago when I was involved in it, because I worked at Southern Illinois University and studied geochemistry there and all about coal, and then came back to the UK and led a big department looking at carbon capture and usage on coal-fired power plants and then on gas-fired power plants. It's had a number of false starts. You know, back in 2006, the UK government was going to put $1 billion into building these demonstration plants. It just didn't happen because there was the, you know, the whole crisis around what happened in the States and around the world in 2008. So the technologies all need to play their part. My answer is an and. We need everything thrown at this book called Net Zero. But it shouldn't be a battle around who earns and gets that difficult pound, dollar, or euro. We need to be able to finding the right way that has the best impact for the people that we need to see. For the Commonwealth nations, we can hear the urgency around the islands and the nations, and the fact that many of those people still do not have electricity or energy. What was my statistic I mentioned this morning? It was recorded that another 20 million people are now living without electricity or energy across the world. So that takes the number to 775 million who are not already enjoying electricity. So it's everything. You do your research, keep pushing it forward, but don't get sad or disjointed or disappointed if we're saying it's renewables and clean tech all the way, which is where I now sit. Anyway, that's the end of the session. I took a bit of liberty there. I got on my little high horse of working 35 years in energy. I would like you to join me in thanking this panel, chaired by Mr. Krishnan, which is Kate Wallace-Lockhart, Elijah Fisher, and Richard Rugg, who came and spoke on here. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors, SSE, who've kindly allowed us to host this event here and organise with the FICCI and IHA. I hope you've enjoyed this session, and please do follow up on any ideas or questions you've not had asked by coming and speaking to the panellists or to myself or to my colleague George here at the beginning. Thank you. I know we haven't got the picture. Come on, Alex.